Usually there'll be time for Q&A as time goes through, or we can leave some questions to the end. But I think
how will you are we doing Henry's questions first?
Yeah, Henry's just gonna have a chat with you and go through it that way. We'll
aim to sort of like go through the basics in the first half hour, and then second half we'll spend talking about any questions which come from the audience.
And how do you take the questions?
They usually raise a hand, or it'll be in chat, and I'll put them on the spot. That's what usually happens.
Okay.
Steve will do the moderating.
Yeah, and I'll do the moderating, and Henry will be he'll be the chairman of the meeting. So let me admit, I'm going to meet everybody now. Yeah. So here we go.
Yeah, please admit everybody. Let's get on with it.
Good morning, Dave. Good morning, Tom. Good morning, David. Morning, Lincoln. Morning, Mark.
Morning,
just bringing a few late stragglers in. Morning, Benjamin. Good morning, Rachel. If you've just joined, if you could mute, that would be great, just to allow Henry and Romi to speak. But if you have just joined, welcome, and please go on mute. So Dave at Aries, you're still unmuted, but do you want me to mute you, or? Yeah, okay. There we go. So that's Henry's fine. And there's a few others joining. So Sarah Brennan. Morning, Sarah. If you could mute, that'd be great. Good morning, Aaron. As usual, we'll leave this for another minute, probably till about 10:33, and then we'll introduce you to the wonderful Henry Tapper. I'm singing your praises today, Henry, aren't I? I think I'm having a bromance with Henry Tapper. I'm having one of those Djokovic sort of bromances going on, this morning. So there we go. Right, it's now 10:33. We are being recorded. So Tom, Hugh, Brooke, Lincoln, everybody happy with being recorded? Thumbs up. Good. Okay. Please enter any comments in the chat, or as usual on Pension Playpen, we like to be interactive, informal, and we're all friends. So please raise a hand if you'd like to ask any questions of Romi or indeed Henry. But Henry, I'm going to pass over to you and Romi, and enjoy the session. Over to you, and I will go on mute.
Thank you, Steve. Can you all hear me? Good. Okay. Well, delighted to have Romi with me today. We, as you probably know, have been blogging away over the last week about Romi's letter to the Pensions Minister, which was announced on Monday of last week, and the context of the conversation we're having today is very much about that letter and her feeling that some master trusts were perhaps not putting all their efforts into speeding transfers up and perhaps hiding behind regulations. So we're going to be looking at the reaction to Romi's letter and asking some questions over the next 25-30 minutes. You can come in at any time, but we're going to leave the second half of the meeting really just initial questions for anybody about anything. So feel free to be as contentious as you like on this call. The gloves are off. Okay, so let's start, Romi, with this whole question of combining pots. Why is it that we need to combine pension pots in the first place?
Well, Henry, people want to combine their pensions quite simply because they want to take control of their financial futures and they're planning for retirement. So in this day and age, most people will have multiple different jobs. And every time they switch jobs, they will leave a pension pot behind with their previous employer and provider. And it can become incredibly cumbersome and administratively burdensome to administer all of those pots. And so it can make good sense to bring them together in one place. Now, the main reason that people do this ultimately is so that they can see how much they have today. So they can use that information to figure out how much they need to save for tomorrow. And so they can make those contributions into their pension pots, grow their pension pots, and then eventually withdraw from their pension pots and spend their pension money. So consolidation makes a lot of sense within a lifetime of planning for and preparing for retirement.
Okay, so that's great in principle, but there have been people on social media saying, but why do we have to do this with specialist consolidators? Why can't we consolidate within master trusts or in our workplace pensions if they're GPPs and so on? Why is it that people come to you? Why don't they consolidate in their master trusts?
Well, I think that many master trusts do offer consumers the ability to move their pensions into those master trusts. So I think that option is certainly there. The reason that consumers pick Pension B is because we offer a fantastic experience for our customers. Whether that's through the process of consolidation, where we keep them informed, or whether that's through the customer service that we offer, or whether that's through the app that we have. What we offer to our customers is the ability for them to be pension confident by using our tools, by using our technology, by using our customer service, and we ultimately give them the choice to prepare for their retirement using Pension B. What other providers offer is certainly important as well. And I think, everyone should be focused on their competitive proposition and the way that they serve their customers.
Okay, well, I guess as CEO of Pension B, I'd rather expect you to say that. But there have been criticisms levied of Pension B of late, one of which is that you dropped your requirement to do the safeguarding of people's protected benefits and allowed people, if they chose to basically join you or transfer to you without safeguarding. And you've got some criticism for this. What is your position? I haven't heard you actually restate your position or give a. Can you explain why it is that you allowed that to happen?
Yeah, I'm very happy to explain. So I guess first let's take a step back and kind of think about how this works in a broader industry context, and then I will very happily explain how we approach this at Pension B. So within a broader industry context, when a customer moves their pension, a consumer moves their pension from one provider to another provider, and they don't use an advisor for whatever reason, they end up signing up to a pension provider where in almost all instances they are required to tick a box saying that they have checked for themselves, and they are happy if they are giving up any anything like a guaranteed annuity rate, or whether they're happy to bear an exit fee, which is the reverse side of a protected, special benefit. Now, when I set up Pension B, I quickly realized that in instances where there are older policies, there can certainly be things like exit fees or protected benefits. And I think the guaranteed annuity rate is probably the most important one that comes to mind for me. And so our policy is as follows. If you sign up to Pension B without a policy number, which the vast majority of our customers do, then our policy is to automatically check your paperwork to see if we can find an exit fee or a special benefit, and we have a list of those that we scan for. And where we find one of those, we inform our customers and ask them if they wish to continue with their transfer. So they are given the opportunity to proceed or not to proceed. And so that is what happens in the vast majority of pension transfers, because we get them without a policy number. Now, there are instances where customers already have their paperwork in their hand, and they will sign up to us with a policy number. Where customers have indicated that they have their paperwork in their hands, then we treat each pension transfer according to a list that is associated with the provider. We have green list providers, which will include providers like Nest, where no checking is necessary because we know that Nest doesn't have exit fees. We know that Nest doesn't have things like guaranteed annuity rates. And there are red list providers that I won't mention on this call, where we always check, and there is no option to opt out because they have been known to have an exit fee or a guaranteed annuity rate or other such things. And then there is an amber list of providers where any of these these features are exceedingly and exceptionally rare. And in the instances where our customers have indicated they have their paperwork to hand, we allow them to either ask us to check or for them to proceed having checked for themselves. And so the approach that we take is very much a risk-based approach that we believe offers a lot of customer protection and does what is good for our customers, while at the same time recognizing that the rest of the industry where an advisor is not used doesn't offer that option. And so we think that what we have is very much appropriate for the circumstances and appropriate based on our knowledge of what the customer has to hand and doesn't have to hand.
Okay, but a lot of people have criticised you and said, well, why would you want to take away a protection which is always to the benefit of members? Is there an upside for your policyholders in doing away with these safeguarding protections?
Well, in many instances, yes. So oftentimes where you find a policy with an exit fee, that policy is usually associated with substantially higher charges. And so the exit fee is really a bit of a red herring because you might be paying 2% per year, for an ongoing basis in order to avoid an exit fee upfront. When it comes to, things like a protected pension age, we certainly have customers who tell us that, they're not interested in a protected pension age because they're not interested in withdrawing their pensions until they're in their 60s or 70s, or they want to leave, the money to their children. And so I think it's important to listen to what customers want. And ultimately, we also have to remember that for the most important safeguarded benefits, as they are defined by the legislation, which will include a guaranteed annuity rate, it will include a defined benefit pension, it will include a guaranteed minimum pension. If you have over £30,000 worth of those, then it is a legal requirement to get advice. And so there are many protections that exist within the system to ensure that we achieve an appropriate balance of giving consumers choice while also protecting them and making sure that there are safeguards in place in order to avoid, poor decision making.
But presumably the main reason that people want to do away with safeguarding is they just want to get on with the transfer. Are you finding transfer times actually going up at the moment? Is there a problem with transfers?
We have seen an increase in transfer times over the past couple of years. In fact, transfer times have increased by about 45%. There seems to be a general deprioritization of customer service. And we can certainly see that in very, very long hold times to certain providers, and we can see it in transfer times. Origo actually publishes a quarterly index that demonstrates that reported transfer times have increased substantially. And then, of course, there are the unreported transfer times where providers continue to do manual transfers, and those can take months and months and months.
So why do you think this is happening? What's the reason for this deprioritization?
Well, I think, the flip side of that is that it's simply not a priority. There is no compelling requirement for pension providers to prioritize the wishes of their customers when they choose to leave. I think we probably have many advisors on this call, and they too will agree that, customer service standards have slipped because it's not a priority, and that simply needs to be addressed.
Okay, well, I can see there being a general slippage in standards, but the specific issue which you wanted the minister to address was what you called providers hiding behind regulations. And the regulation which the providers seem to find most difficult to deal with is the incentive to transfer rules. And Pension B has been seen to incentivize transfers by some lawyers. Do you want to comment on whether or not you think you are actually falling foul of the regs, and whether people should be throwing whether red or orange flags at you and at your members to stop you from transferring?
Yeah, I think, this is a really, really important question, and I think it's at the center of the debate over the past couple of weeks. But it's important not to lose track of the fact that, transfer times have been increasing across the industry for everyone. when it comes to this particular issue, I'll make a couple of points. I suppose first is on the definition of incentive. Now, the argument of a handful, it should be said, of master trusts and not the general industry, which I think is using the regulations with their intended purpose. The argument of a handful of master trusts is that incentive has not been sufficiently well defined in the legislation, and therefore it should be taken, at its natural meaning. And the continuance of that argument is that our refer a friend scheme would be caught with that. However, if you take incentive at its natural meaning, what that really is any sort of thing that encourages someone to do something. Now we've spoken a little bit about customer service. Is customer service an incentive to do something? Is an app an incentive to do something? How about fee discounts? A lot of pension providers offer fee discounts. If you refer family members, if you transfer in pensions above a certain amount, are those considered incentives as well? I think that, with legislation, we always have to consider the intent that has been laid out by that legislation, and we always have to consider the way in which a normal person would expect that legislation to be approached. And therefore, I think the current argument very much rests on a flawed interpretation of the legislation, and the Department of Work and Pensions and the pensions regulator have jointly issued a statement saying that any transfer that previously would have gone through prior to the new anti-scam legislation should be going through now. And so it's slightly perplexing as to why that joint statement is not being taken into account.
Okay, but I'm sure we're going to have questions on this because there are deep-rooted positions being taken on whether or not you're transferring. My understanding is that the strict interpretation of the law would always say that whatever the type of incentive offered, it's an incentive, and therefore a red flag will be flown. But I also know a number of schemes who regard the incentives that you've got as not much more than, in the overall scheme of things, gimmicks, and are basically saying the spirit of the law should be observed, not the letter, and are overriding what you and indeed all the other non-advised SIPs are doing. So we'll no doubt have questions on this. I look forward to hearing people's views, and see, it'll be quite interesting if we can do a vote, Steve, to see whether or not we can come to a conclusion as to who falls onto one camp and who falls into the other. But this is obviously not one that's going to go away. Do you think that the DWP are going to need to rewrite their legislation to ensure clarity on this, or can we get by on what they've got?
I think in the long term that the legislation does need to be reformed, and I think it needs to be reformed in a more holistic way, because incentives is the battleground of today. But really, until there is a very clear mandate for pension providers to let their customers go when the customer wishes to exercise that right, until there is a very clear mandate, then I think this issue will simply resurface in various forms and guises. I think in the short term, the vast majority of the industry is applying common sense. It is listening to the pensions regulator and the DWP, who believe that they have provided a lot of clarity on this matter already. We tend to agree with the DWP and the pensions regulator, and so we would expect kind of the vast majority to continue operating and applying the legislation with its intended purpose.
Okay, well, obviously the purpose of the red flags and the orange flags is to prevent scams going ahead. Have you any suggestions about how we can make transfers easier without making it easier for the scammers?
Yeah, I think we should all be very anxious about scams, and that is exactly why the regulations were brought into place. I think we can already see, the regulations where they are being applied as per their intended use have been incredibly helpful in stopping transfers that shouldn't be going ahead. However, it's important not to conflate the threat of scams with the speed with which a transfer should be done. The speed with which a transfer should be done is an administrative question, and the Ombudsman is already enforcing 10 days as the days, that are reasonable from an administration standpoint. So the question is, how do we combine that administrative standard that is already being externally enforced with the current legislation? And I think probably the best way to do that is to find a way to create a safe list that, consumers can really rely on, and to then apply a switch guarantee of 10 days as is being enforced to that safe list. I think that this idea for a safe list has been going around for many years, actually. And we now have the capability to make it a reality. We have regulation on TPR side that focuses on ensuring that there is appropriate regulation of master trusts. On the FCA side, data is collected regularly by the FCA on what constitutes a standard and non-standard investment. And so where an FCA regulated pension provider is only offering standard investments, then I think that, we should be very confident in allowing a pension switch guarantee to be in operation. And so in that way, we would enable, we would enable consumers to have the best of both worlds. We would enable them to be protected from scams, and we would enable them to enjoy administration standards that are fit for the 21st century.
Okay, so you would want to see sort of SIPs which are restricted to simply offering funds, for instance, on that whitelist. What about SIPs which have options to self-invest and so on? Are they the kind of SIPs that would make it into your safe harbour, or would you exclude the likes of Interactive Investor and Hargreaves Lansdown and so on from your safe list?
Well, I think that, that is ultimately a question for the regulators as to where to draw the line. But currently within the regulatory framework for FCA regulated pension providers, there exists a definition of what is a standard asset and a definition of what is a non-standard asset. And therefore, for me in particular, standard assets as within that definition should certainly benefit from the ability for customers to exercise their choice in a timely manner.
Okay, one final question, which came up this morning actually from someone who's previously been executive director of the pension regulator, who was questioning the whole issue of value for money and saying, well, if we're to say that value for money is really achieved from economies of scale, then master trusts must always have the advantage over personal pensions. So why would we ever want to encourage people to transfer from master trust to personal pensions? Have you got a view on that?
Yeah, I think quite simply, it's customers' money and it's their retirement, and I think they have a right to prepare for retirement in the way that suits them best. Value for money has been defined by both the pensions regulator and the FCA by reference to three things: performance, costs, and customer service. And I think that that is a sound framework within which to evaluate value for money. So as long as pension providers are offering, services on the basis of performance, cost, and customer service, then I think it's perfectly, I think it's incredibly important, for consumers to be able to make the decision as to where they want to prepare for their retirement.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question about the informed choice, because at the moment there's so little way of making an informed choice other than by going to a financial advisor, which frankly a lot of people don't feel keen to do when making these kind of decisions.
Yeah, Henry, I would love to kind of, I know many people on the call, but I also don't know many. And, my experience with pension transfers is really what motivated me to, to start this company. I tried to move my own workplace pension, and I tried calling the major providers, and no one wanted to talk to me without an advisor. I then tried to get an advisor, and nobody called me back, because, I suspect my pension, possibly wasn't appealing enough. I had about £30,000 at the time. And then, I moved to a fund supermarket, and I ended up paying, around 2% per year. And the fund went down at a time when markets were rising, and it should have gone up. And so I think that can be the experience of many individuals. And we need solutions that address the practicalities of the financial services system today.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, that's probably a good segue into a wider discussion, because the people you mentioned who are on the call and you don't know are probably the people who want to ask some questions. So at this point, I'm going to throw this discussion open to the House, and Steve's going to pick out any yellow hands which come up.
Well, there are no hands at the moment, but there's plenty of questions in the chat. So I would say Tom probably was the first person to raise an issue in the chat. So Tom, over to you. What's your comment and thoughts?
Hi, thanks, Steve. Hi, Romi.
Hi, Tom.
So the first question I asked was slightly tangential to the subject matter that Henry and Romi have been discussing hitherto. So we might want to park that. I think probably more relevant to where you just got to in the conversation was this question around this whitelist of providers, which, as you say, Romi, many people have talked about over the years. And I think everybody would agree in principle that having a whitelist of, recognized providers, if you're transferring from Hargreaves Lansdown to Pension B, there shouldn't be a problem here, right? Or vice versa, because everybody knows who they are. So that should be a useful tool to facilitate the execution of those transfers in a timely manner. What that's always bumped up against is no one's willing to take responsibility for defining that and curating it. And what if something goes wrong? What if a transfer using that whitelist is executed and somehow someone loses money? And that's why everybody has always balked at taking responsibility for that. So I'd just be interested in your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what has perhaps changed over the years is this concept within the FCA regulated universe of what is a standard asset and what is a non-standard asset. And the FCA is now regularly collecting data on whether a pension provider holds standard or non-standard assets. And that's something that didn't exist many years ago, and indeed, wasn't collected. The reality is that these days capital requirements are also very much linked to the standardization or non-standardization of assets. And so implicitly, there are already these judgments being made about, what is a riskier asset and what is a less risky asset. Because the riskier assets require more capital to be held against them within the FCA regulated universe. And so if we are happy to make capital judgments on the basis of what is standard and non-standard, then I think we should be able to make transfer judgments on that basis as well. And we certainly see, kind of switch lists operating within the current account system. And within the current account system, we say that if an entity is regulated by the PRA, then the current accounts, a current account switch can proceed within 7 days. And I think it's time to start applying some of those principles around, what is considered to be riskier and less risky within the FCA regulated universe, so that we can apply similar switching principles there as well.
Okay, I'm going to forgive me, Steve. I'm going to come back on that once, and I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but you've kind of answered the question, but you've also not answered the question who's taking responsibility for this, because your implied response is, well, it should be the FCA because we're leaning on FCA regulations, but you actually need, and this is where it has always foundered, so which is why I'm labouring this point, someone has to take responsibility for saying Pension B is on, Hargreaves Lansdown is on, the Cushion Master Trust is on, but this provider is not on. Someone has to own that. And that's the bit it's always, and you seem to be saying, well, it should be the FCA. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think that within the current regulations, there already exists a sort of safe list, and it includes, it includes, it includes master trusts, for example. So, I think that within the FCA regulated space, what we need to do is focus on figuring out who within the FCA regulated universe should be there as well. And so, I think that there's no reason why the regulator shouldn't take ownership and responsibility of putting forward who they believe should be on a safe list. What do you think, Tom?
Okay, so just to be clear, Romi is saying the FCA should take responsibility for the whitelist of safe transfers.
What do you think, Tom?
Well,
I'd love to know what you think.
I would love to see. So I think this. So I don't have a pre-packed answer to that question, Romi. And I was chuntering about this on Twitter last week. That I think it needs trade bodies. I think it needs regulators. I think it needs government agencies, maybe the DWP, to come together collectively and agree what the terms of that whitelist are, and then who's going to police it. And I think until you do that, I don't think it flies, because every time we've raised this question in the past, all those agencies individually have said, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not taking responsibility for that. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just highlighting kind of why it hasn't happened to date.
Got it.
There is a solution which the FCA could easily implement, which is today, if you haven't got an IGC, if you haven't got a GAA, you are outside of the camp. But if you're operating within the IGC GAA framework, you are within the camp. That is very similar to the Master Trust Assurance framework, which the TPR have. And I think everything could be very simplified if the FCA just said, we're going to make use of these IGCs and GAAs who we've spent so much time and effort on, and create an operation there. Now, I'm conscious there are other people on the call. Does that have any resonance? Does anyone want to pick up on this? See,
well, let's move on to other questions, Henry, because we've got plenty of other questions. So, Philip from Guide, do you want to say
go. But I really want to get in with the question. So, Romi, it's Philip Hodges from Guide. We're one of the partners that actually are the ones that send transfers to you. So we've got experience of the transfer market. My question to you is about the cost of transfer, and then thinking particularly about small pots, because we provide people with the technology that facilitates transfers, but we stop at that point where it has to go to Origo, and I find with our clients that cost through Origo can end up being prohibitive when it comes down to very small transfers. Obviously, everybody will have their own deal with Origo for other services, but do you think the economies already stack up well, or do you think there is still a small pots problem that is yet unresolved?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to look at the direction of travel of the DC market more generally. I think that ultimately every consumer who is also a worker is going to end up saving the vast majority of their pensions within a DC pension. And so while pots may be small today, I believe that they will grow because people need to save for their retirement. And so if you approach the customer relationship as a very long-term relationship, then I think that it's all right to make an investment up front. And that's certainly the approach that we've always taken.
Who picks up
I can't comment on the Origo.
Romi, do you pick up the cost though? Because if you've got an Origo fee of £6 and a TPR levy for personal pension providers of £1, for example, that's £7. So if your AMC is 0.5 a point, you're earning £5, or if you're 0.75, you're earning £7.50. So are you picking up the cost for that, or are you introducing minimums for Pension B clients?
We don't have minimums for Pension B customers. We had feedback very early on that our customers might be able to afford to save £100 today, but they could be able to afford to save, £1,000 in a few years. And so, we take a long-term view on our customer relationships, and so we don't have minimums. With regards to kind of the cost of electronic transfers versus the benefit of electronic transfers. I don't know if we have someone from Origo on the call. I think that they're pretty well equipped, I'm sure, to answer this question. From our own experience, what we can see is that the amount of manual effort and labor that goes into sending transfer forms around the system, transfer forms that require time from the receiving scheme to fill in, the seeding scheme to fill in, the customer to fill in, the postal system. I mean, I don't know, exactly what the cost of a stamp is today, but imagine that, a transfer form gets lost many, many times, not to mention the fact that people are being required to send their valuable information around in the post. So we actually believe that the cost of avoiding electronic transfers and relying on manual transfers is substantially greater than the cost of using electronic systems.
Okay. We've got another hand raised by Dave Robbins. David, do you want to ask your question?
Hi. Yeah, just a couple of questions about charges, if that's okay. I mean, you talked about the value for money, the kind of three-pronged framework, and I'm sure you've got a sort of good story to tell on the customer service side of that. But in terms of the charge side of it, you probably pick up some business from legacy products with very high charges where people save money from transferring into you, and you probably pick up some business from workplace pension schemes, master trusts, which will sometimes have lower charges. And you mentioned Nest earlier, and you said, well, we're okay taking money from Nest because there's no exit fee. Well, there kind of is a bit of a hidden exit fee, because if I'm saving in Nest, I pay a very high contribution charge up front. Once I've paid that money is gone, and I pay a very low 0.3% AMC thereafter. And so by switching my money to you, I'll probably pay more on that. And so I just, your customers have got a lot of information about how good the app is and customer service and all of that. Have they got enough information on the charge side where they're going to be paying more? Because my fear is it looks like, oh, it's only another 0.2%, 0.1%, whatever, which sounds a very small number, but if that's 0.2% of £40,000 every year for 25 years, it's a meaningful amount of money.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question on kind of charge comparison, and I'll make a couple of points. I would say kind of, first and foremost, what I've noticed in the automatic enrollment market is the proliferation of hidden charges, whether that is kind of, monthly pound-based fees or whether that is contribution fees. I think the reality of paying kind of 1.8% on money that you are putting into your pension can have an impact on your pension down the line, right? So especially when the vast majority of the saving is being done through contributions. I also think pound-based charges, on small pension pots can have a very detrimental impact. And, we've raised our concerns many times about that. Within automatic enrollment in particular, a £1,000 pension pot can often be considered a sizable pension pot, and a £1.25 or £1.50 or £2 charge per month will dramatically eat into that balance. There's almost no investment return that will compensate for that charge over, and help that pension pot to build up. So I think it's really important to be transparent around charges and to compare like for like. And that's where we've always taken a very proactive approach. We have one annual fee, which includes the fee that PensionBee gets, but also includes the underlying funds. That fee ranges from 0.5 to 0.95%, and the average is 0.64%. So it's actually well below the automatic enrollment charge cap on default funds that doesn't even apply to us, but that we see as an important hallmark in the sand because it does apply to automatic enrollment providers. So our average fee is actually well within the cap, and it's really easy for people to understand. And we disclose it in pounds and pence on our website through a really easy to use calculator, but also on the simpler annual statement. So we've actually gone above and beyond what's been required from the regulators in terms of showing costs and charges in pounds on people's statements. Go on, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. So would I see then, so let's say I was a deferred member of Nest, I've been paying into Nest, I've left that employer, I'd already paid those, contribution charges, which you say are opaque, but I can't get that money back. I'm now paying 0.3% in the default fund. I want to switch to you with what you say is on average 0.64. I think you said. So would I see pounds and pence, right? That extra 34 basis points is going to be this much a year coming out of my pots, and potentially, for 25 years or whatever until retirement.
Well, that depends on what you want to do with your pension, right? You have the choice to leave your pension with Nest. You have the choice to transfer it to Pension B and continue making contributions. The most important driver of what someone gets out of their pension is how much they pay in. And so what we see is that our customers want to actively prepare for retirement, and therefore the cost of making contributions is incredibly important, and the ease of making contributions is incredibly important. If I have to spend days of my life filling out forms in order to make a contribution, or days of my life trying to log into a portal, then that is a time cost on me. And I think that people should be free to make the decision that they want to make on the basis of what it costs them for the purpose with which they intend to use their pensions.
Okay, just following up from David's point then, Romi, which I think what David's getting at is he's gone from 0.3 to 0.64, 64 bips maybe, 65 bips. So effectively you've doubled the charge for David. So that's his point, number one. So going back to your list of performance, cost and service, or customer service, you're basically saying then that Pension B is as good as or better than Nest, tick. Cost is doubled. So then you're into the performance sort of category. Is that something that your systems analyze, the performance of Nest versus Pension B, or obviously you can't take past performance as any guide to the future, but is that another factor that your systems do? Look at the performance so that you're not breaking any VFM rules.
Absolutely. We have a value for money framework that our investment committee applies, and it looks at all aspects of of our value for money within the three components that the regulators have outlined as being important. So performance, costs, and customer service. And what we have found is that because we use flagship investment products, that our returns are very much in line with what people would expect to see from from some of the from anyone who uses the flagship products of global asset managers. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. We take value for money very seriously at board level.
Okay, Mark, you've had your hand raised for a while. Do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. I'll just go pick up on the point about the current account switching, because it was something that interested me a couple of years ago, and then we sort of gave birth to STAR, and the sort of STAR initiative came forward. So I wondered what your thoughts are on STAR and whether that might help with some of the member expectation side of things. But the other interesting point about the current account guarantees, if something goes wrong. So these things happen, right? So you may well get the odd minus or under £30,000 fund come across with a guaranteed annuity rate potentially. I'm sure it's very infrequent, but it may well happen. I don't suppose you've had two, other than not an ideal member customer journey, but the fact is you've identified that they're better off where they are. You get the funds back. There's still a bit of reassurance there, assuming the funds can go back. So is there any danger really with these things, as long as the member can be put back in the right position as some sort of compensation? Where's the real downside for members unless the funds can't go back?
Yeah, I think very, very good questions. I mean, I'm happy to start with the STAR question and what my views are on that. So we obviously didn't join STAR. Our view is very much that this is a problem that needs to be solved through a firm legislative commitment. It feels like that there are always going to be reasons to delay transfers. today we're talking about, an incentive that hasn't been, defined as well as some, trustees might like to see it defined. Other times we are talking about COVID, and COVID has certainly taken its toll on customer service. In the past, we've spoken about kind of the cost of electronic transfers. There always seems to be a reason, not to prioritize this. And so my view is that we have to do it through legislation, because that is what shows the commitment to getting it done. And as much as I, wish I could think that our membership would have, contributed to the success of STAR, the reality is that transfer times have gone up by 45% over the past couple of years. And so I think that the time for legislation really is now, even if many people have been working behind the scenes, on that. With regards to, with regards to the dangers, I suppose, of having a switch guarantee, I think you make a very sensible point around, can transfers be reinstated after they have been, after they have left a particular provider? That is usually a question for the provider themselves, with regards to whether they are willing to accept it back. And I think that in the short term, our experience is that providers usually do accept transfers back if a customer wishes to go back for whatever reason. But I think you'd have to ask them if they would accept it back, because arguably, for them, they would love for the, for a guaranteed annuity rate to potentially be transferred out. We think that, they should be able to go back if they choose to do so. But you'd have to ask them.
Good answer, Romi. Thank you. Robert Reed, you've got your hand up for a question. Hello, Robert.
I think Robert's put his question in the chat.
Oh,
so
is he? Hang on, let's have a look at the chat then. Sorry.
If I get my mute off, I might be able to talk.
All right, I'm Robert.
Oh, I think the mute button is still on.
Robert, are you muted or there we go? Can we hear you now?
Should be able to hear me now.
No, we can hear you. Yep, we can hear you. Yep, brilliant.
Such are the vagaries of Mac. Two things really. One, just jump back to something for a moment, if I can, Steve. I actually sat in a committee that discussed these white lists with the DWP, yeah? And we explained to them, or at least I explained to them in words of one syllable, what would happen if they went down this route of not having a prescribed list. They were refusing to listen. And the people who drove that were the DWP. And they drove it hard because TPI were trying to stop them. And I'm quite happily, swear if anybody wants me to swear on that one, that they were the ones that were the problem. They were determined to get their name in the frame for stopping scams. That was their only reason for doing that. We explained that if we did it properly, we would save a lot of people a lot of time, a lot of anguish. They ignored it. So the people you want to shoot are in the DWP. Anyway, moving on. On the incentive side, I think some of the confusion is, and I may have misread this, Romi, so forgive me if I do. If people get an incentive, they also get tax relief on the incentive payment. Is that right?
That's right.
Now, I couldn't find anything in the technical manual of Inland Revenue that said they should get tax relief on that. So is that something you've specifically spoken to HMRC on?
No, that's in the tax manual. Oh, sorry, there's a bit of a strong echo. I'm very happy to send you the link afterwards, but it does specifically state that relievable contributions are those that are made by you or a third party on your behalf.
Yeah, it also goes on to talk about what third parties will be making them. So I think what you've got is a typical thing in the Inland Revenue Manual, which is why some people paying incentives, other platforms aren't paying in tax relief, and some are. So it's just a point of clarity, really. But yeah, if you send me that'd be a big help. I'll happily send you back the bit I think that causes a bit of contradiction. But that's nothing unusual in UK legislation. Thanks for that.
Cheers, Robert. Thanks. Yeah, and going back on the incentive scheme, I mean, we've got a number of providers on here. I know we've got Now on here. Adrian, I don't know if you're going to pop in, but the rub originally was about the difference between the regulators' regulations and the FCA regulations. How are we going to solve this, Romi? I mean, do we think the DWP regs just need to change and help this situation? Because trustees are hamstrung by regulations on the TPR side, whereas you are allowed, according to your compliance, I guess, to do incentives. So what is the solution, Romi?
Yeah, I think that, I'll make a couple of points. I think if you have a look around the market generally, what you will find is that refer a friend schemes or kind of rewards are being offered by virtually every single large company in the country and most of the large pension providers in the country as well. I see many individuals who belong to some of those pension providers here, but refer a friend schemes and sort of, cashbacks and fee discounts for referring members, which is the same thing as a cashback or a refer a friend scheme, are not uncommonplace. And so, if you think about the implications of applying kind of the legislation in the way that a handful of master trusts have interpreted it, what you would effectively get is a standstill in pension transfers. And that can't possibly be the intention or the right approach to the regulation. So I think in the short term, what the vast majority of pension providers have done is to follow the intent and the spirit of the law. And I think it's incredibly important that the industry does understand the intent and the spirit of the law, because I think if you go down this route of an undefined incentive, I think you could put almost anything there that encourages a customer to switch their pensions. So in the short term, I think that we should be doing what is right and what is practicable, and what the vast majority of the industry is already doing. I think in the medium term, I absolutely agree that that the regulation needs to be reformed. I think it would be prudent at this point, given that we have, specifically, focused on the incentive clause, to reform that clause. But I think a broader solution, which is the one that we've been very much discussing on this call, around, how do we create a safe list for transfers, and as Rob has pointed out, I don't think that some of these arguments will be new to the regulators. They seem to have been made before, but hopefully the necessity is now substantially clearer as to why that's necessary. And I think that safe list and a reasonable switch guarantee time frame should be encompassed within the reform of the legislation.
Okay, good answer. Adrian Balding, Now Pensions, what do they think?
Oh, Steve, thank you. I really wanted to ask Romi a slightly wider question, which is around the whole pensions being main selling point of combine your pensions, see them in one place. You set out the webinar extolling that. We see it in your lovely adverts at the railway stations. Is that going to become redundant with pension dashboard, which will enable people to see all their pensions in one place for free without having to pay any charges at all on the maps? And if that ceases to become the main way of competing, do you think the competition will move to other things that we can do for customers, such as decumulation, where I think the industry today does terribly little in terms of helping customers to work out how to spend their pension pot when they arrive at retirement? So your selling point's been fabulous and it's got you 800,000 customers or something, but as that becomes redundant, will you be moving on to other areas to compete and to draw customers in?
Well, we tend to have a very customer-led approach. So, what our customers find of use and the feedback that we get from them is what's going to drive our product development. And so the strategy will very much, as always, be led by our customers. On pension dashboards in particular, we are very excited about pension dashboards. We combine the pensions of customers who know that they have pensions What we don't do is we don't find lost pensions that you never knew you had before. And I think the pension dashboard will be amazing for that, helping to reunite people with their lost pensions. I think it's fantastic that they'll be able to see their old balances on the pension dashboard. But I think ultimately the dashboard is designed to engage consumers and to engage savers into preparing for retirement. And that's really where we come in. Our customers, when they consolidate their pensions with us, yes, they can see their balance. Yes, they can see it on a daily basis. But ultimately, what they want to do is they want to understand how that balance and any contributions they're going to make is going to prepare them, for later life and for being able to fund their salaries when they stop working. And I think you're probably right. I think over time it will become, important that we focus on decumulation and on the way that people spend their pensions. Some of the research that we've done indicates that it's still, incredibly difficult to withdraw your own money from a pension provider. I've heard of customers having to fill in forms and waiting, months in order to be able to make a withdrawal. And I think that when we've encouraged people to save diligently for their whole lives, I think that, when they're withdrawing their pensions, they also need to be, treated in the same way as when we were encouraging them to pay into their pensions. And of course, there should be safeguards around that, so as part of, as part of our offering, for example, we, of course, when people are looking to make a withdrawal, we tell them that they would benefit from speaking to PensionWise about that. That is also built into our transfer in journey for over 50. So there are going to be points of, enabling consumers to learn about how to be responsible with their pension savings, because it's just like their salary, ultimately. But I think that when they have made the decision to withdraw, and I think when they do want to withdraw, we need to treat them in the same way as we do when we take their contributions.
Thanks, Romi. And I'm also a huge fan of PensionWise as well. I think it's a fabulous service.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, Adrian. Tom, you've had your hand raised for a little while. You want to come back with a question?
Yeah, so this was something I put in the chat earlier on, and now we've arrived at this point in the conversation. I'll sort of come back to it. Thank you, Adrian, for sort of teeing that up, because my question really was, I mean, great you're signposting to PensionWise, but that's not a bad thing. But also, it's just kind of a minimum, right? You'd kind of expect that. In fact, you're required to do that. So that's great.
Definitely.
My question was, there's clearly still a shortfall between what people need in terms of helping them manage that decumulation process through the duration of their retirement, because it's complicated, really complicated. It's very easy to get it wrong, and what they're actually getting. And, ideally everyone gets bespoke, personalized financial advice and someone's holding their hand the whole way through, and that's just fantastic. But not everyone's getting that. So really just, it was an open question. What do you think good looks like in this space? And can you just build on your earlier comments, how would you see PensionBee's support for its customers developing in the decumulation space?
Yeah, we're a big fan of tools and calculators, so I can give you an example of a couple of the things that we offer. One of the features that we have built within our app is the ability for customers using certain assumptions to work out what they need to do in order to make their pension last until the age of 100. Do they need to start withdrawing later? Do they need to put more money in now? Do they need to forego their 25% tax-free cash lump sum? So those are scenario builder tools that customers can easily use themselves. And that's in the stage before we get to withdrawals, because I think a lot of the a lot of the learning actually needs to take place before the customer has in practice decided to take the money out. By that point, they've already made their decision in terms of what it is they want to do. I think at the point of withdrawal, I think it's really important to highlight the effect that tax can have on your withdrawal. And so within our withdrawals process, we actually build out an estimated tax amount that the customer could be liable for if they withdraw from the taxable portion of their pension. And so as we continue to learn about our customers and, what it is they want and the tools they need to be able to make those decisions, we continue to build out our tooling in order to help our customers to navigate through that. And of course, if customers want to take financial advice, then, I'm sure that, I'm sure that many will. So, hopefully throughout the system, including, pension-wise, including, financial advisors, including toolkits that providers offer within their system, that we can get to a good place so that people can, spend their money with confidence in the same way that they saved.
I haven't heard you mention investment pathways in that description. Are they of any use, or have you more or less considered them redundant before they started?
I think investment pathways are of use, certainly. I think that, I also think that well-governed and well-managed defaults are of use. A lot of customers won't make active decisions all the time. And so I think it's important for defaults to be in place and for them to be good. And, we certainly adopt that approach with our own tailored plan. I think investment pathways definitely have a role to play as well. They simplify that choice making for consumers. So, I think that they are good in principle. My main kind of challenge to investment pathways is that they're virtually impossible to compare with one another in the way that they have been set up and selected, which, I think makes it a bit tricky to judge their success.
Okay, we're working on that, really. I know MAPS have got plans to reform their pension investment pathway comparison sites, so let's hope that they see those through. Well, we're coming to the end now of our hour-long chat, and I'm absolutely delighted to see that everybody who started is still here, just about, which is testament to how interesting you've been and how interesting the questions have been. So thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely.
Before we go, Steve, do you want to sort of wrap up and just give us any pension Playpen news before we go?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, as you said at the beginning, we're nearly approaching 1,000 members. Like Pension Bee, we have invite friends on the Pension Playpen site. And next week we've got Hymans Robertson speaking and on investments. So that should be quite good fun. Yeah, please. What I would suggest is if people have items that they want to blog, please go on our blog section and blog, because it's really important to share information and share ideas. And if you have an event, you can also use Pension Playpen to run your own events, and then we can promote them to the 1,000 or so members, which is quite cool as well. From my personal point of view, I want to thank Romi for her time today. Really appreciate that. And I appreciate now why she's written her letter to Guy, who was our once pensions minister and is now back as our pensions minister. But hopefully Romi will understand why trustees have reacted in the way they've reacted as well. So there's got to be a solution, and we need to work hard to get that solution through. The bottom line is we want happy members, and we're all in it for the members at the end of the day, whether they're young, old, fat, thin, yellow or brown, black or white, doesn't really matter. Everybody must have a pension, and it must work as hard as it can for them. Thanks to Henry, really appreciate that, and really appreciate your time again, Romi, and thanks everyone, and be safe. And as we always say, let's pray for peace in the East. So there we go. And Romi, if you want to send through that stuff, that legislation stuff, then that'd be great. So yeah, perfect. Okay.
Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye.